I do not pay income taxes. My income tax is zero every year. If for some reason I get a paycheck or something and they take taxes out of my paycheck, then I get that back at the end of the year from the government once I do my taxes. So my required amount of taxes that I have to pay is zero every year.
Today, we are talking about physician finances, why they pay so much in income tax, and busting the myths of tax loopholes and incentives. So, Mike, you're not a physician, but your annual income is comparative to a physician. How much do you pay in income taxes every year?
I do not pay income taxes. My income tax is zero every year. If for some reason I get a paycheck or something and they take taxes out of my paycheck, then I get that back at the end of the year from the government once I do my taxes. So my required amount of taxes that I have to pay is zero every year.
So, we're definitely going to dive into how you're doing that. Let's start with why do physicians pay so much income tax?
Obviously, in the United States and most states, we have a progressive tax. So the tax goes up as you make more money. So the less money you make, the lower the percentage you pay. The more money you make, the higher percentage. Actually, in history, there were some times like the highest we're paying 90% of income tax. It's crazy. But basically, that's how it works: is the more money you make, typically the more you pay in income taxes. However, I think what we'll probably be talking about is the government has very specific rules and incentives in place in order to not have to pay income taxes. And that's what I do.
Yeah, historically, physicians, while they do invest, usually in 401ks, IRAs, things of that sort, they're not taking advantage of some of these special incentives and loopholes that you were just mentioning. They're typically W-2 salary income earners. They pay their, based on what the average physician makes, they're in that 37% federal income tax bracket. And then they also have state income taxes in most states.
Yeah.
But
So
you're
that's a
not.
perfect, and that's a perfect explanation. What you just shared is we're not talking about like moving income to a different bucket, not taking income and putting it into a 401k. I hate to even admit this, but I don't contribute to a 401k because I don't need that tax benefit. The only reason you would ever put money into a 401k is because it restricts you, but you move it there to reduce income. I don't have to do that because I don't have to pay income taxes. So we're not talking about like kind of the basic, what people would think they know about income taxes and the basics of just shifting income from your paycheck to a 401k bucket. That's not what we're talking about today.
Sure. Before we get to some of the loopholes, why don't you pay any income taxes?
So, man, thank the Lord that I fell upon an amazing mentor, maybe 10 years ago. But I went to a conference and a mentor shared with me, he was a CPA, and he helped me understand the tax code. And then when I dove into what he said to kind of confirm, he was spot on. So the reason I don't is because the IRS and the government in general, they wrote the tax code in a very specific way that basically said, we want to incentivize our citizens to do certain things. How do we incentivize them? And the way you incentivize them is you give them a break on the income taxes that they would otherwise have to pay if they do what the government wants you to do. And then on the flip side, if you don't do what the government wants you to do, then you basically pay that penalty via a tax. So the government needs a certain amount of money every year to operate. If you don't help the government make more money in some other way, then you just pay a tax as basically your fee for living in the United States of America.
Interesting. So the government says we got to run, we got to operate. We need income from our citizens, revenue from our citizens in the form of taxes to do so. But they're willing to give away some of that leverage that they do have to those that are willing to participate and help them in certain areas. What are some of those areas?
Yeah, so we need money to run, whether it be a national park that we all enjoy, whether it be defending our nation with armed forces, whether it be just taking care of the poverty situation. I travel the world. I love going to different places. There is no place that I have been where, granted, we have poverty, but no place that I have been where poverty is at least assisted here. You can find shelter. You can go to homeless shelter. You can get food. A lot of countries I visited, there is no option for that. So our tax revenues are necessary. The government takes care of a lot of things in the United States that other countries don't necessarily have the ability to do. So the taxes are necessary. What the government does in some of those ideas is the government says basically, if you create a way for us to make more money than what your taxes are, then we will not charge you the taxes. So in this specific term, think of big business. If a business comes into town and they create more jobs, those employees will pay income taxes. There will be taxes on people coming, let's say it's a restaurant, coming to eat at the restaurant. There will be all these different taxes. And basically, the government is incentivizing you to open that business and saying, in exchange, you won't have to pay taxes because you're going to create so much more tax revenue for us. So they're saying, don't worry about your 20% of the income, of a tax rate, because you will create 40% income for us in the form of tax revenue. So to the government, to us, it seems like a loophole. To the government, it's an ATM.
That does make sense. And as we relate that to physicians, it's very difficult. Most physicians are W-2 working in a hospital or a clinic, a larger healthcare system. As a W-2 employee, to the point you just made, they are not providing additional value or doing things in their day-to-day with their income that creates more income for the government. And so that's why they're it's just taxes for them.
Yeah, unfortunately, what most physicians hate is the big business, the big insurance above them. But the big business and big insurance above them is who is getting the tax break. Because a hospital group, for instance, if they're a for profit hospital group, they are getting a significant tax break in different ways because they are also employing physicians, which pay very high taxes. So they're creating jobs, but they're also paying very lucrative on the tax side of things jobs for the government. So those tax breaks are just basically a step above a physician, and whoever employs them is receiving those tax benefits, not the physician themselves.
Yeah. Thinking outside of physicians and just to kind of bring home what this idea means or this incentive down the road for me here in central Iowa, Facebook is putting in a big data center. Uh, they were giving huge tax breaks to put it in there, and everyone in the area was complaining, saying, "Hey, Facebook's a nearly $1 trillion company. Why do they need millions of dollars of tax breaks?" But in the government's eyes, they're like, "Yeah, we're willing to give you that much in tax breaks because what that's going to do is it's going to grow the community." I mean, they're already building hotels and shopping centers and rec centers and things like that in that area now that that data center is there because it's created more jobs. It's really grown that area that was just cornfields before, and that then is creating additional tax revenue for the government. So they're willing to trade a smaller amount of tax breaks for Facebook to receive larger tax revenue from the surrounding area.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, granted, we can't say good or bad whether you turn a cornfield into a data center, whether a
Mhm.
community wants population growth or doesn't. But at the end of the day, a town manager, city manager, their job is to increase income for their community to provide better services. So in your example there, they're basically running a simple calculation. The calculation, of course, is very complex in how many jobs are truly coming, how much tax revenue that is. But generally speaking, they're running a simple calculation and they're saying, does a $60 million tax break today equate to more money than $60 million in the future? So they look at construction jobs coming in, building jobs. They're looking at transferring ag land to property taxes of commercial land. They're running all these calculations and saying $60 million today equals $300 million over the next 10 years. That is an ATM for us. We will give them 60 million because we will receive 300 million in exchange. It would be literally like if you walk to the ATM and you said, every time I put in 20, it spits out 40. Who wouldn't go and put in $20 into the ATM over and over and get 40 back in exchange? So that's really how
Yep.
the tax code is written, is in a way to say, here's the ATM, here's the rules. If you would like to use the ATM, here's the rules of how to use it. How do you put in this and get back more than you put in?
So governments, institutional investors, large multi-million dollar companies, how are they using these loopholes, and how can someone like a physician who's not in that $60 million range, right?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
can they use a similar incentive or a similar loophole within their own personal financial plan?
Yeah, so obviously, big business use the Facebook example. Not many people have $60
Hmm.
million in a tax break they're talking about. I obviously don't have $60 million, but to not pay income taxes in my own personal life is pretty nice. Like my family greatly benefits from not paying any taxes. So basically what it is you just have to break down and look. So putting money into a 401k is really not a loophole. Nobody looks at that as a loophole, but it's also not actually a tax savings. It's just a tax deferral. So if you put it in traditionally and get a tax savings today, you're just paying taxes down the road. If you pay it as a Roth and you pay the taxes today, that means you don't have to pay taxes down the road. It's just do you want to pay taxes today or tomorrow? What I do and what we're talking about is pay taxes never. That's the goal. And in order to do that is taking the incentives that the government gives you. So basically what you're doing is you're going to look at something like a Facebook and say, okay, $60 million, that's not me. I'm not building data centers, but let's drop off some zeros on the backside of that. Let's say I'm only doing $600,000. Well, now you start looking for ways to apply your $600,000 into the world in a way that the government says, this is how we want to do it. Really, it comes down to two ways that the government incentivizes its citizens. There's always little initiatives that come up. Like we could touch on like the green initiatives. Right now we have the Democrats in office. Green is very big. I don't care, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter, but they have different initiatives that their party cares about. So when they're in office, they will run these little one-off initiatives to try to incentivize their population to do what they want. But the two that it always comes down to is housing and jobs. So the government says, our citizens need housing. They need shelter. We don't want to have to provide shelter for everybody. It's too hard of a task for us to take on. So what we do is we incentivize people to provide shelter for our citizens. So everything real estate related is going to have a lane of incentive. So if you're investing in the stock market with your money, that big business that you're investing in is getting the tax breaks, not you. If you go and buy a rental property and you provide housing for an American citizen, then the United States government says, thank you for taking that one housing problem off of our hands. Here is a slight incentive on your taxes for doing so. Now, what we do is the apartments. So we go buy 100 housing units in one apartment complex, and the government says, because you took care of 100 people of our problem, we're going to give you basically 100x of the benefit of that incentive. So that's the one lane, is taking care of housing on behalf of the United States government. Basically, there's great incentives. The other one is jobs. So everybody knows unemployment rates, everybody knows job reports, inflation, all this stuff works together in the economics. But specifically, what it really boils down to is the government says our citizens need to work to produce economic benefit for our country. That's how we stay a country. So they say, if you provide benefits for our citizens in the form of jobs, if you give them a place to work where they can make money, then we will incentivize you by giving you a discount on your taxes. So same thing, you talked about Facebook, but really it could be the mom and pop store. It could be anything where you employ somebody else, just like in the housing world. When you say, I gave this one citizen a job, the government says, thank you for employing one of our citizens. We don't have to worry about that person anymore. Here is an incentive for doing so. And then if you employ 100 people, you basically get 100x of that incentive. And of course, it's not exactly 100x, and it depends what kind of business you open. But generally speaking, those are the two lanes where the government says provide either housing for our citizens or provide jobs for our citizens. And if you do that, we will incentivize you by saying you don't have to pay taxes. Because truly, at the end of the day as well, the government understands that when they don't make you pay taxes, they're not benefiting you. They're not saying like, thank you, we just want to give you a gift. They're saying, thank you for doing that. And we also know that you took care of this problem, but we also know that these people you employ, these people that you provide shelter for, they can now go and operate and work within the United States government. And these people who maybe wouldn't have paid taxes otherwise because they didn't have a job, they now are paying taxes. So they're saying, for me, for instance, you would have paid $100,000 in income taxes. I don't have to pay that. But they say the reason you don't have to pay that is because you have created $200,000 of tax revenue for us across your businesses and across your real estate investing. So they're really exchanging. It's a huge benefit to me personally, and it's a huge benefit to the government, and it's a huge benefit to the people who now have shelter over their head and don't have to worry about that. And it's a huge benefit to the people who are working and receiving a paycheck because they need that to stay alive. So it's really just a shuffle of this, and it's written in a very specific way. Most people, it blows my mind because they look and say, tax loopholes, scams, strategies. But this mentor who helped me understand this was just such a life-saving guy, because he showed me the history of it and said, like, this is what literally the conversations that happened before the tax code was written, and helped me realize that there is no such thing as a loophole. There's no such thing as like a little secret tax code that nobody knew about. The tax code is simply a large book of incentives that the government says, if we don't want to have these problems in our country, we have to incentivize people to take care of this problem for us. So it's really a very well designed playbook that really everybody benefits. I don't pay taxes. The government makes more taxes. And the people who are kind of stuck in the middle now have shelter and a job that they didn't have before.
That was fantastic insight. And really a way to simplify down a really complex document like the United States tax code. At least the loophole section or the incentive section of that document.
Yeah.
But a great insight on how you simplified that. What I'm hearing then for a physician who is a W-2 income earner at a hospital or a large healthcare system, they really have a few options, right? They can't employ people because they themselves are the employee. They're not the employer.
Well, as of right now, right? But so they can't employ people right now. But if there's a private practice option and they want to explore that route, then they could employ people. So like that starts to become part of the decision of, do I want the headache of being a private practice physician? Or do I like the simplicity of just showing up, doing not just showing up, but like, you don't have to worry about customers. You don't have to worry about, all this different stuff. You show up, you do your job, you get paid. But if you say tax incentives are my number one goal, then you could open private practice and now you will receive all the benefits of providing employment for other individuals in the world.
Hey, D&D podcast family. I want to take a quick break in this episode to share a little behind the scenes of why the Doctors and Dollars podcast and our Wealth Wednesday series were made and why they're important. We have a number of physicians in our Grand Vision family office, and through conversations with them, we realize there is a huge void in financial education for physicians. We don't have time to personally work with every doctor out there, so the podcast is a way for us to offer a resource where you can learn about physician-focused wealth strategies via Wealth Wednesday, while also learning from other doctors making a splash in the medical community via Doctors and Dollars. Providing value is our top priority. And if there's a specific question or topic that you want to hear about, just reach out to us on any social media platform or go to the Doctors and Dollars website, which is ddpod.com. Also, if you'd like to take your wealth plan to the next level and be a part of a community of money-minded physicians in our family office, we open applications just twice per year. You can explore and get more details about the next application period at grandvision.co. Now, back to the show. So for those who do like the idea of still being the employee at a hospital, their route then would then be real estate. Hey, you need to provide housing for United States citizens in order to get those tax breaks.
Yeah, so it's actually very simple, because you don't have to necessarily be the one that is providing the housing or running the business either. We look at that as like, that's a very active approach to doing it. But you could also be basically an investor. So you might gain the same benefits of, let's say, I don't even know, like, of a physician who could not open a private practice, but let's just pick somebody. Let's just say a cardiologist, just to assume. They say, listen, there is no market for private practice for me. That option of providing employment doesn't work. So what can they do? Well, they could team up with, we'll make the most obvious private practice, a plastic surgeon. They could invest their money rather than putting it away into a 401k that is pay taxes today or pay taxes later. They could say, I'm actually going to invest in a plastic surgeon's private practice where now I don't personally make the jobs, but my money does create the jobs. And the government doesn't look and say, did you personally sign this person's paycheck? They just say, were jobs created because of you. And whether it's your money making the jobs or whether you personally are making the jobs, they provide you the incentive. So you could invest in somebody who is doing a private practice, and then you would receive the same benefits that they would receive. Or vice versa in the real estate world. If you didn't want to go buy a house, you don't have the time to manage it, equally, you can invest in somebody who provides housing. And then as long as you are a part of providing that for the government, you get the benefits back to you.
Yeah, great scenario, or great analogy that you use there. And what are the strategies? You don't have to be the one that buys the house, that buys the apartment complex. Just like if you're investing in a 401k, you're not the one that has to go out and buy the Apple stock or buy the Tesla stock. You simply put your money into a 401k, and there's an administrator who does that for you.
Or even better yet, you're
But
not the one creating the iPhone and developing the Tesla. Your money is going to help that iPhone be created. It's going to help the Tesla get sold as an investment, but you're not the one actually, hanging out with Elon Musk and building the next edition of a Tesla car. It's just your money doing it. And as long as you're part of it, you receive the same benefits in that world. It's a 401k, benefit, but outside of that, it's a direct benefit.
yeah. So how does implementing one of these tax incentives or tax strategies into a physician's financial plan, how does that directly impact them today? This doesn't reduce the income that they're making through the hospital or making through their private practice. This just simply reduces the further tax of new income that is coming in from the investment, correct?
Yes and no. It depends on the playbook is there. So it's like a football game. Depends what play we call, is whether we're going to throw it or whether we're going to run it. So some have an incentive and they say, if you do this, this is the incentive for doing such. But if you do this play, then this is the incentive for this. So it really comes down to designing and looking at the playbook and saying, here's where I'm at. Let's say the football analogy, we have a great running back. We're going to run more running plays. If we have a terrible running back and a great quarterback, we're going to say, well, because my position, I'm a much better quarterback, we're going to run more passing plays than running plays. So it really boils down to that. And like the analogy that I think of that just comes to mind is it would be like somebody walking into their physician. Let's say something super simple. They have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and the physician says, listen, you're very early onset of this. We really don't need medication yet. But if you start living a healthy lifestyle, if you start working out a little bit, if you eat healthier, maybe cut back on the alcohol, we can probably keep this in check and you're not going to have the consequence of high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And if we relate that to taxes, it's the same thing. If you start making some of these changes, we can probably reduce the tax burden that's coming in the future. However, if you don't, then you're going to have the consequence of, and the cardiologist is going to say, you're going to be on this medication for the rest of your life. That's like paying the tax. Like, do you want to take a pill every day? Do you want side effects of medication? Do you want to have this go on in your life? Or would you rather take the incentive of being healthy by doing other things? And it's really up to that patient at that point. Is the incentive strong enough of not taking a pill and not having high blood pressure to go and work out and go eat healthy? Is that incentive strong enough to do that or not? If it's not, they pay the tax of medication. Not right or wrong. It's just a choice of, did I want to do this or do I want to pay the tax? And the same world in the tax world is the incentive strong enough? So if the incentive is, I just don't want to pay more in tax, but I would like to make more money, well, that's one playbook that we can run. We can set up a plan like that. If the incentive is, I don't want to ever pay taxes again, I want to be like Mike and pay zero taxes starting next year, well, we're just going to run a different play. We're going to say that incentive is much stronger. So it takes a much stronger commitment to execute on that play. The easier the play is to run, the less of an incentive and the less of an impact in your financial world. The more complex and difficult, then the greater the incentive that's going to be received by that person.
Another fantastic analogy, making it simple to understand of how that works between the treatment options that someone has with a certain diagnosis versus the treatment option that someone has based on their tax liability and what sits before them.
And so really, we look at this when we talk about this. I look at this through that lens because, not to sound like, I don't want to sound like we're some great, but I mean, we're specialists at this. Like, this was my money, so I cared about it tremendously. Like, I really focused on this because it's my money on the line. And we learned all this kind of expert knowledge. And really the problem comes down is it's just a lack of knowledge to even know that the playbook exists, and then B, to really know what the heck you're reading when you open the playbook. Use that football example. If Tom Brady gave you the playbook, okay, now you have the playbook, but you're not an NFL quarterback. You don't know how to execute on those plays. You don't know what to do with those plays. You just have the playbook. So it's a matter of first gaining the knowledge to know the playbook exists and have it in your hands. and then open the playbook and say, all right, how do we actually run this play? Like, I see X's and O's all over this paper. How do I actually apply this play, to what I'm doing? And I think what this is what I've come to learn is most people, they go from $0 in net worth to about a million in net worth, maybe a little bit more, really, 3, 4 million. That's kind of basic personal financial stuff. You can get from 0 to 1, 2, 3 with pretty basic financial education. We're thinking like high school football team, like plays are like, all right, we kind of understand this. We get this. Like, it's not anything crazy. And then most of the stuff that we're talking about is typically going to be like a 20 million, 25 million plus. So there's this gap in the middle of people who have like 1, 2, 3 million net worth. Well, 1, 2, 3 million net worth and 25 million net worth is a big jump. That is not like something small. Well, the problem is none of this education exists for that middle gap. So this middle gap is stuck either using the high school playbook and never really gaining any true ability to get to that next level, or they find out about Tom Brady's playbook and they get it, but they don't know how to apply it. And the reason that gap exists is because if you have the Tom Brady playbook and you don't know how to run the plays, you have to hire somebody to do that. Well, until you have like 20, $25 million, you just can't afford to hire somebody full time to execute on that playbook for you. And most of the people that have that 1, 2, 3 million, they've achieved that wealth by simply exchanging their time for money. So they work very hard to make that money, leaving them no time left to actually understand a playbook. So now they're stuck with no time and they have money, but not quite enough money to basically hire the Tom Brady to execute the plays. So they're stuck in this middle ground of like, what do I do now? I don't have enough money, but I don't have the time to do it. And they're stuck there. And that's why most people can kind of barely achieve, just that scratch on that surface of real wealth, but they can never hit that 25 million, which is real wealth. So the whole idea of it is basically taking this playbook and bringing it down to this 2 to 3 million and kind of filling that gap and basically understanding not the entire playbook, because that's very difficult, but saying, okay, in the physician world, now we're taking every profession out there, everybody who makes money and is in that 1, 2, 3 million. And now we're throwing everything in the playbook that talks about attorneys, that talks about tech, that talks about all this other stuff. And we're saying which plays specifically work for physicians. And now we're just focusing on those plays. And that's really the only way you fill that void of the 3 million to 25 million is you basically take this super complex playbook and then you throw out all the stuff that doesn't apply and you just focus on the stuff that does. So now you niche down and now you can actually understand these super complex plays at that level. We could never do this if we were explaining these things like on a nationwide basis, because there's so many different nuances to every profession and everybody's kind of ability in their world. So that's basically, I don't know. I think that answers the question, but it explains why that gap exists and why it's so hard to push through that ceiling of, that real kind of worth of, when I say worth, net worth.
Yeah, well, it definitely answers the question. I think it all comes down to leverage, right? The leverage is how much more input to create more output is the definition of leverage. And so most of those people who are in that 1, 2, 3 million net worth range that can't break through, the leverage that they use is maybe a pretty straightforward financial advisor, right? Most physicians have a financial advisor simply because they don't have the expertise in finance. They don't have the time to sit there and manage their own finances and understand that. And so they go out and they get a financial advisor that will help them do that. Problem being, 95% of the financial advisors that are out there have pretty simple tools and strategies that they use for any of their clients, let alone just physicians, right? So they don't have the playbook in place to get someone to that next level. You use the analogy of high school versus a Tom Brady level. So now you're kind of talking high school football versus NFL football. The gap then, just from an analogy standpoint that you're describing is how does someone get from a high school level football player to a college level football player and then college level football player to a Tom Brady, right? And so that gap in between what strategies are currently being used today as a 1, 2, 3 million net worth person, what are the different strategies that then take them through that college level, take them through to get to that NFL level, that gap there is amazing. And I think the one thing that people don't understand is the number of millionaires that are in the United States has grown rapidly just in the last 25 years. Problem being, the actual net worth of many of those millionaires is not that. People say, "Hey, I'm a millionaire because my house and my business might be valued at that, and my 401k." But when you actually take it down, what's the true net worth? Someone is not worth that much, right? And so to actually build long-term wealth to get through that college, I guess, in the analogy sense, that level of expertise or planning to get to the NFL level, then that takes some different strategies, and many of those are ones that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess like in summary, to just share this is that's really what we want to talk about of why do physicians pay so much in taxes. It really comes down to two things. They don't know the playbook exists, or if they do have the playbook, they're not running the correct plays in order to reduce those incentives or those taxes. Because the government says, here's the play to run. And if you run this play, here's the incentive. We will reduce your taxes for that. So that's really what it comes down to. And then the myth side of things is that these are kind of like loopholes within the government, but they're really not. They're more of a recipe. They're more of the playbook that the government wants you to run. So people who don't take advantage of the plays, they call them loopholes because they say, like, you got a loophole. You're taking advantage of a loophole. And really, I'm just running the play that the government put before me and said, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z in this exact order, here's your benefit. So it's not a loophole, but the people who choose not to run that play call it a loophole. You know, like when Tom Brady throws a million touchdowns, he's just executing the play perfectly. Well, the opposing team who's getting torn up by Tom Brady is not look at it that way. They don't go, man, this guy is really just running the play perfectly and really doing a great job. They're mad about it. So they don't, understand it. They present it in a different way. So I think that's really what we want to do is just break down the fact of the true science, remove emotion from it. Whether you think people should pay a lot in taxes or pay a little bit in taxes, the truth is the people who pay high taxes are paying high taxes because they're not following the playbook that the government says, if you want to pay less taxes, here's how you do it. There's no loophole. There's no emotion. There's nobody gaining a bigger benefit or less of a benefit. When I started applying these strategies, my net worth was very small. There was very little incentive to me because I had a small net worth when I started putting these plays into practice. Because that's another thing that people think is like, you have to be rich, you have to be wealthy to employ these. When you're rich and wealthy, the benefit is much greater because it's kind of almost like a percentage. But you can start employing these with very little money. I mean, I teach my kids these lessons all the time. They're probably sick of it, but I teach my kids these tax lessons because I want them to grow up. The playbook will be very simple for them because they've been studying the playbook since they were 12 years old. They understand it. And they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a job, but they can run the plays better than most people who make a lot of money. I mean, I see people making a ton of money and they don't understand any of this. And my kids could run that play better than them. But my kids don't have any money yet. It's no benefit to my kids, but one day it will be very beneficial to them.
Yeah, and even at a granular level, we're kind of crisscrossing analogies here with the NFL and recipes. But I like the recipe analogy just in the sense of people who pay a lot in taxes, they might have access to the recipe, but they don't have the right ingredients either. I mean, they are using the 401ks, the IRAs. They might have a 529 for their kids, but there's no passive income, there's no tax mitigation, there's not all these different some of those little peppered ingredients that you need to make a really good recipe. They have the recipe book, right? Let's call it the tax code. They have the recipe book. They just don't have the right ingredients to actually create a great dish.
Yeah, I
And so
mean, at
that's
the end of
another
the
part
day,
of the education and the the acumen that comes with the financial planning and making sure that you do have all the right ingredients. And so the financial literacy there, I think, is just, well, I only need like 3 or 4 ingredients and I should be fine. It's like, well, no, to have a really good recipe, you need like 10 ingredients, and you're missing some of those key ones.
yeah, to tack onto your analogy there, it would be like, it'd be like running to McDonald's for a meal is like putting money into a 401k. And the same thing, it's nothing wrong with putting into a 401k. There are benefits, but that is the very basic basic level of understanding the tax code. That is one piece of hundreds and hundreds of pages of tax code. That's like running to McDonald's because you're hungry versus sitting down for a gourmet meal. And the difference in the quality and the taste and what that chef has put together is night and day difference. It's still just food at the end. It is still a tax benefit, but it is just a whole different experience when you have that full, put together. So I think for the physicians to understand taxes and kind of next basic steps to take is first awareness that a playbook or a recipe book of not paying as much in taxes does exist. Then realize that those plays are in there. You can choose what plays you want to run. You can choose how much you want to reduce your taxes. They obviously aren't very simple. It's not just, I pick play number 4, do it, and tomorrow I have the benefit. There is give and take. It is effort. It is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But that awareness that the playbook exists, then identifying the plays that fit most with your values to say, I would like to provide housing in a way, or I would like to provide jobs, or I would like to take advantage of this incentive and start running just one basic simple play to get a feel for it, understand it. And then you can start adding on to that and building that knowledge and start executing more plays. And that's what I did. It wasn't like I stopped paying taxes overnight, but as I ran more and more plays and I understood it more, finally it got to a point where you pay no taxes. So step 1, awareness. Step 2, understand and read the book a little bit and identify some plays. And then step 3 is find out how to execute on those plays and start employing them in your life. And I totally realize that not everybody is going to do this. It's not like they have to. If you're fine paying those taxes, or even if you just don't want to have to put forth the effort to execute on these plays that minimize the taxes, that is totally fine. But our goal is to provide that first step of awareness of this does exist. If you don't like it, you don't have to continue down this path. You can change it. And then kind of giving people that step of how do I change it? Because I think really the awareness is the number one problem, right? If you're paying a lot of taxes and you think it only exists as a loophole of like some made up fairy tale thing that, you almost have to be shady to take advantage of. If that's how you look at the tax code, you're never going to employ any of this because you're looking at it from the wrong lens. You don't have the awareness of what the tax code truly is. So first is breaking that myth. And then once they have the awareness, now hopefully, as we continue kind of producing these videos, we can start to share how do we actually start running these plays? How do we apply it? So I hope this video does that, breaks that myth of the awareness that the tax code exists for a very specific reason. Most of the United States population looks at it out of the wrong lens. They don't look at it for truly why the tax code was written. They look at it for why Uncle Joe and, my brother Tim said the tax code was written, not truly why it was written.
Yeah, well said. I think this conversation is going to be very insightful, very eye-opening to the people who hear it. Riddled with analogies, great analogies, which is going to continue for anybody watching this video and videos thereafter. We're going to continue with the analogies. Mike and I love them. But to go with, football, food, and Facebook, as our analogies to help people understand what is out there and what they can achieve if they just take action. Action was your step 3. Really, it is awareness, learning, and then taking action. Those 3 steps can actually be, they'll be life-changing. And we're going to be providing all that information as we move through this series.